Mother moved in her abusive boyfriend into our house only for him to abuse me, and she did nothing about it. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. All of this happened over 10 years ago. When I was 16, my mother met the devil in the form of a personal trainer. My mom and dad at the time had gotten a divorce. My dad started dating somebody else, and my mom started dating her personal trainer. Now, the extent of her obsession with this man was disgusting. She would do anything to impress him. She would even try to pay for his bills. She got him a bunch of clients for his gym. She would buy him gifts every single week. She was completely and utterly obsessed. From the moment I met him, I knew there was something wrong with him. He would tell my mom that I needed to be disciplined. He also judged the way that I dressed. He would judge my friends, so I started defending myself. I would talk back to him, but this just made him even angrier. Let me just give you some context. I was a straight A student. I was captain of my soccer team, and my mom and I had never had any issues before that. So he kept brainwashing my mom into believing that I was just a bad kid. And for some reason, my mom started agreeing with him. 2 months later, he convinced my mom that he should move in with us. That's when the abuse started. He gave us rules. If I broke them, I had to run for an hour. Part 2 is Mother moved in her abusive boyfriend into our house only for him to abuse me, and she would do nothing about it. Disclaimer, is not my story time. So he made a set of rules. He typed them out, printed them, and put them on the fridge. And if I broke any of these rules, I had to run on the treadmill for an hour. Like I said, my mom and I had never had any issues before him. We were more like best friends, and she believed me. At this point, he had completely brainwashed her into believing that I was just a rebel, and that I needed to be disciplined. One of his rules was that I couldn't eat past 10 p.m. He would lock the fridge so that I couldn't get in. I would come home so late from school because I was in so many clubs and sports. By the time I came home, he would force me to do my homework. After that, I had about half an hour to stuff my face with anything I could find. He even told my mom not to make me dinner because I needed to become self-sufficient. I lost about 10 pounds within a month. I was playing soccer every single day. When I would get to school, I would try to eat as much as I could. One day, I broke the lock on the fridge, and he threw me so hard into a wall, I got a concussion. He told my mom that I did it. Part 3 is my mom's boyfriend would abuse me and she would do nothing about it. Disclaimer, is not my story time. After he threw me into the wall and gave me a concussion, he told my mom that I was the one trying to fight him. That all he did was try to push me off and I hit the wall. My mom believed him. He would find any reason to grab me by the arm and shake me. He would hide my backpack and my shoes so that I would be late to school. And anytime my friends came over, he would bully us. Eventually, it escalated to slapping me every time I talked back. My mom would see it and not do anything. When I complained to her, she would cry but not do anything. I asked her to kick him out and she didn't. She told me that she was afraid of being by herself. I was not going to wait for the next time. I grabbed my backpack and ran to my dad's house. And when I told my dad what was happening, he took me to the police and we made a report. When the police showed up to my mom's house, she came to her senses and realized what was happening. She kicked him out and I didn't speak to her for 3 years. I ended up getting back with him, but then they broke up again. I'm now into real estate and I own several properties. My dad and I see each other every single day. I barely speak to my mom. I recently found out she got back together with him. How do I break them up? Give me ideas. Story time about how I married my father. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, and trigger warning for this. My mom and dad got pregnant with me when they were only 16. They were both young and irresponsible. My mom wanted to keep me, but my dad didn't. My dad basically broke up with my mom and told her that if she wanted to have me, she would have to do it on her own. So my mom did. Luckily, my grandma helped her out a lot and she was able to stay in school. As a baby, my dad would visit me every now and then, but he wasn't really involved in my life as far as my mom says. Here's a little backstory on my dad. My dad grew up in a really strict family and he was expected to graduate and become a doctor. So that's pretty much exactly what he did. During the time that he was in college, he really didn't come see my mom or I, but of course my mom and him kept in contact. When my dad, or should I say husband, graduated from medical school, he finally got married. And of course this was hard for my mom because she thought eventually they would get back together. By the time my dad remarried, I was about 12 years old. I didn't have a relationship with him at the time and it didn't bother me. I was so busy with friends in school I never really thought about him. Not until I turned 14. This is when things started changing and I told my mom that I really wanted to talk to my dad. So he and I started talking on the phone and eventually he came to visit me. But things started changing when I turned 19. He actually ended up getting a divorce and he and I would spend more and more time together alone. Part 2 is story time about how I married my father. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, and trigger warning for this. When I turned 19 is when my dad and I started spending more time together alone. Or should I say my husband? Keep in mind, I really didn't have a relationship during my teen years. We only spoke on the phone a few times and he would visit every now and then, but not a lot. When I turned 19, I was living in college and I was closer to my dad. So I decided to reach out to him and ask him if he wanted to have dinners every now and then, and he said yes. The first time we went out to dinner, we actually had a lot of fun, and it really didn't feel like I was hanging out with my dad. It was more like I was hanging out with a friend. We just didn't have that father-daughter dynamic. We would meet up almost every single weekend, and our relationship was actually very friendly. We would make each other laugh and talk about everything. And this is when we realized that we had a lot in common. Eventually, he asked me if I was dating anyone, and I told him I wasn't. When I got home, I started realizing that I wasn't thinking about my dad like a dad. I was thinking about him like a man. So the next time I saw him, I decided to tell him that. And that's when he told me that he didn't see me like a daughter either. It took a lot of courage for me to tell him this. So that's when things started to really change between us. Every time we would hang out after that, it was more like a date. We started getting to know each other and he would hold my hand every now and then. And a few weeks later, we had our first kiss. Part 3 is up. About how I married my father. Disclaimers is not my story time and trigger warning for this. After our first kiss, everything changed. We didn't think of each other as father-daughter. And of course, our relationship began to get more serious. And one thing we kept discussing was, should we tell our family or should we just keep it secret? So we kept it secret for almost a full year. I told my mom that I was dating someone, but I wouldn't tell her who it was. Also, a little side note, my mom and dad didn't have any contact between them at this time. My mom was actually married to someone else and they were very happy. But for me, it was getting to the point where I needed to tell somebody. Because yes, part of me felt that this was really wrong, but the other part of me felt that it was just right. I had never met anybody like him before. So I decided to tell my grandma, and she nearly had a heart attack. She called my mom right away and told her the truth. That's when my mom came over and we talked for a few hours. I explained to them everything and they still didn't agree with me. My mom called my dad and they got into an epic fight. I was totally expecting this, but it really hurt. My mom and grandma were totally against the relationship. That's when they told me that they would never speak to me again if I kept the relationship going. A few months later, we decided to get married privately. I didn't tell my mom. She actually found out through my best friend who was totally against our relationship as well. And she pretty much tells my mom everything I tell her. It's been 2 years since we got married and part of me still feels guilty and like I did something really wrong. But now it's getting even worse because I actually met someone who's my age and is not related to me. But I don't have the heart to break up with my husband/dad. I told my mom about this new guy and she really wants me to get a divorce. I feel like all along I was just looking for the love of a man because I didn't get that from my dad. Now that I'm seeing someone else, I'm realizing how wrong what I did was. But I don't want to break my dad/husband's heart. How can I fix this? What should I do? This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's on Instagram. My mom and dad had me when they were really young. My mom was 17 and my dad was 19. For some reason, my mom doesn't like talking about him, so I never really found out exactly how they broke up. All I know is that they stayed together until I was 5 years old. Something really bad happened and then my mom kicked him out of the house. Like I said, I don't even know what happened. I was 12 years old, he begged my mom to come back, and she let him live in the apartment we had. But he's pretty much a deadbeat. He didn't help my mom pay for the bills. He didn't even want to get a job. He even went as far as begging my mom to become a stripper. He said that she would make way more money than the job she had. She was a secretary at the time. When I was 15, he left our house again. I never got a bad feeling from him when he was living with us though. With a lot of hard work, my mom was able to put me through college. I graduated and I got a really good job. I bought my mom and me a house and we moved in together. Then COVID happened and I lost my job. A friend suggested I start OnlyFans and I decided to do it. I started making a lot more money than I ever thought I would. Some months I was making around $20,000. This one guy would send me $1,000 every single week. In exchange for pictures. Part 2 is up. This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, is not my story time, it's on my Instagram. So this one guy started sending me $1,000 every single week. In exchange, I would send him private photos. Everything was totally fine until he started asking me questions. He would ask me things like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite dessert? Because it's OnlyFans, I never really answered honestly. But then one day he told me, you love The Little Mermaid, don't you? And I was like, what? Because The Little Mermaid was my favorite movie as a kid. Watched it at least 3 times a week when I was a kid. First I thought it was a cousin playing a joke on me, so I decided to block them. The next day, I get another message. This one says, I remember how you used to love hot dogs. That's when I really shit myself. Because my dad and I would make hot dogs every single Friday. It was our thing together. Like I said, he was a deadbeat, so he couldn't afford anything more than cheap hot dogs. And that's when he said, I have a confession. And before I could reply, he said, I'm your dad. I felt so disgusted. I blocked him and then blocked him from my cell phone too. That's when he sends me a long text message explaining why he signed up to my OnlyFans. He said that he was just trying to get to know me, that all he really wanted was to get me back as his daughter. Then why ask for nudes? Part 3 is up. This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. As soon as I read his long text message about why he signed up, I once again blocked him. 20 minutes later, there's a knock on my door. Yep, it's my fucking father. Started knocking on the door so hard my neighbors came out. Called 911 and they came within a minute. I live in an area where there aren't too many people, so my house is really easy to find. Saw my dad walk to the backyard and try to get in through the back. That's when a cop stopped him and asked him what he was doing. Then he told the cop that I had invited him over. Then the cop comes to my door and asked me if I had invited him. I told him I didn't. Then I told the cop about OnlyFans. My dad was so ashamed he actually denied it. But of course I had all the receipts. I showed the cop my phone and the cop told him that he needed to leave me alone. He left my house and I didn't have the heart to tell my mom. But later that night I see another person sign up to my OnlyFans. Turns out it was my dad again. This time he was offering me $3,000 for more pictures. And he confessed that he couldn't help but love me as a woman because I didn't grow up with him. Excuse me, sir? You raised me for half of my childhood. Wanted to get a restraining order, but the judge says it's not that easy. So now I'm considering closing my OnlyFans. I don't think it's fair though. What should I do? My roommate's boyfriend keeps harassing me and I don't know how to tell her. Disclaimer, is not my story time, I'm sending me on Instagram. My roommate and I have been living together for 2 years now. Now, I wouldn't call her my best friend, but we are very close. I don't really talk about intimate things, but at the end of the night, she's always there and we usually have dinner together. Not really close to my family, so to me, it's important that she's there every single night. But here's where things get really shitty. Her and I both got boyfriends around the same time. I met my boyfriend through a friend and he is the sweetest, purest thing ever. This man cries at every single movie. But he travels a lot for work, so he's usually not there. Now, my roommate's boyfriend, he's a personal trainer and I'm pretty sure sure he takes steroids because he's always angry. Should I say aggressive? His behavior became super obnoxious to me right away. As soon as he would come over to the apartment, he would start saying things like, babe, your roommate is so hot. Like, he would say that about me to my roommate. Of course, she tried to laugh it off, but I know it bothered her. One day, he even started joking about how he was going to come into my room one night while I was asleep. Obviously, I did not find this funny. That's when I asked him to leave the apartment. He got so mad, he called me a bitch in front of my roommate and slammed a drawer. Do you think my roommate stood up for me? No. Part 2 is up. Roommate's boyfriend keeps harassing me and I don't know how to tell her. Disclaimer's not my story time, it's not me on Instagram. After he called me a bitch and left the apartment, I was terrified. First off, this guy is 6'2" and he's built like a truck. He's like pure muscle. So when he's yelling in my face and slamming drawers, of course I'm terrified. But my roommate does nothing. But it gets worse. 2 hours after he left, he sends me a text message saying, fuck you. And then he sends me a picture of him with his tongue out, giving me the middle finger. I got up to show it to my roommate, but that's when she actually asked to talk to me. She sat me down on the couch and she started telling me how he's such a good man, how she's never been able to find anybody like him. Then she asked me if I could just try to get along with him. He even started crying and it broke my heart. So I decided to let it go. But the next time this guy came over, once again he started playing super loud music. I came out of my bedroom because I was trying to work and I asked him nicely to turn it down. At this point my roommate was showering, so it was just him and me in the living room. But then he gets up from the couch and walks slowly towards me, looking me up and down. That's when he says, you wish you had a guy like me. I turned around and tried to walk back to my room, but he grabbed my arm and turned me around. Then he grabbed my face and tried to kiss me. I actually gagged. That's when he said to me that I was just playing and that I actually want him. The whole time he was squeezing my arm so hard, I finally got away and went into my bedroom. And that's when he sent me a picture of his thing. I literally almost died. I walked out and kicked him out again. This time he didn't put up a fuss, but now I don't know how to tell my roommate. What the heck am I gonna do? Found out my boyfriend has a freaking wife. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. I'm sending me on Instagram. I met my boyfriend at the gym. Yeah, I know. Terrible idea. You can say it was lust at first sight. From the moment we saw each other at the gym, we couldn't take our eyes off each other. He came straight up to me at the gym and told me that he really liked me. But I was super shy. He was just some random guy I was meeting at the gym. But he was all about me. He asked me for my number and I said no. He asked me for my Instagram and I said no. For the next 2 weeks, he would come into the gym at exactly the same time I did. I would basically go work out whenever I had my lunch break. So of course, he would show up then. Of course, slowly but surely, he would charm me. He would even bring me lunch. After about 2 weeks, I finally gave him my phone number. That's when he asked me to go have breakfast, which I thought was weird. Should have been the first red flag, right? This was his excuse. He said he worked nights, but that his schedule would change all the time. So this meant that he would sometimes work during the day or at night. It was just random. So we went to breakfast. Here's the second red flag. He asked me if we could have breakfast 40 minutes away from where we lived. We both lived near the gym. Of course, I thought this was strange, but I said sure. He picked me up and the whole time at breakfast, he kept looking at his phone. Part 2 is up. Just found out my boyfriend has a freaking wife. Disclaimer, is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. For our first date, we went to have breakfast 40 minutes away from where we both lived. Again, this was another red flag I ignored. During the breakfast, he was on his phone the entire time, and I called him out on it. I asked him why he invited me to breakfast if he was going to be on his phone all day. That's when he made up this whole sob story about how hard his work life was, how he was always stuck to his phone answering emails and text messages from his boss. And of course I believed it. I mean, I didn't know this guy from anything. After that, he put his phone down and I realized he was the most amazing man I had ever met. A man that can make me laugh is really important to me. And we laughed the entire time. We were telling each other jokes. We talked about family and values. We talked about our favorite foods, countries we wanted to go to, places we had been to. It was the perfect date. We even loved the same type of music, and our favorite movie was the same. So as you can imagine, I completely fell head over heels for this man. But the red flags continued. A week after our first date, he asked me to be his girlfriend. Did I say yes? Of course I did. But this was just another red flag. He began love bombing me and always wanted to be with me. But he never invited me over to his place. Part 3 is up. I just found out my boyfriend has a freaking wife. Disclaimer, is not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. Every time I'd ask to go over to his place, he would say no. First off, he told me that he had a terrible roommate, that his roommate was noisy and really dirty and the apartment stank. So for that reason, he didn't want me to come over. And of course I said, yeah, that's fine. Here's the fourth red flag that I ignored. He would ask to come over to my apartment at odd hours. Sometimes he wanted to come over at 3 in the morning. Sometimes he wanted to come over super early. And other times he wanted to come over really late. Because I have a 9-to-5 job, I kept saying no. I needed to get my beauty sleep, please. But even if I said no, he would still come over. Here's the 5th red flag. He would come over to my apartment and instantly fall asleep on the couch. I was always asking him why he was so tired, and he would just say that it was too much work. Well, we've been dating now for 2 months. A few days ago, I started getting suspicious of his situation, so I showed up to his apartment, but he didn't live there. It was an office building. I asked him to come over and I confronted him. That's when he confessed that he is married, and that he's been married for 10 years. But he says that his wife is a nightmare and that he wants to divorce her. What should I do? Story time of how I found out my boyfriend was cheating on me with my cousin. My boyfriend and I had been together for 2.5 years. His family loved me and my family loved him and they expected us to get married. Well, last year when COVID started, we were actually in different countries, so we didn't see each other for 3 months. During those 3 months, we FaceTimed 4 times a day, and we were always texting. He happened to be quarantining in our hometown, so both of our families were in the same place. I was quarantined in a different country. One day my cousin calls me and tells me that she met a really nice guy on a dating website. I was so happy for her because she had had bad luck with guys. Every single week, her and I would catch up on the phone and she would tell me how much she liked this guy, and how amazing their dates were, and how amazing he was in bed, how sweet and considerate he was. I couldn't be happier for her. Well, when I finally get back home, my boyfriend is super distant and cold. So naturally, I called my cousin and complained. She told me to give him space. She said I should just leave him alone. And so like an idiot, I did leave him alone. One day my cousin calls me and tells me to come over for dinner. When I got there, my boyfriend's car was parked in her garage. I thought it was just her nice way of trying to get us to talk. I walk in and catch them doing the dirty on the couch. Come back for part 2. So I walk in on my cousin and my boyfriend doing the dirty on her couch. They quickly get up from the couch and get dressed. Of course, by that time, I'm in hysterics. I'm crying and yelling. My boyfriend instantly got on his knees and begged me for forgiveness. I went up to my cousin and I punched her right in the face. She wasn't expecting that. And I said, well, this is the guy that you've been dating, isn't it? She said yes, and that she was just trying to find the best way to tell me. And so she just thought the best way to tell me was to get me to walk in on her and him doing the dirty. I punched her again. My boyfriend came to her rescue though. Instantly went into hero mode, which made me even angrier, so I punched him too. I stormed out of her house and went back to my house. Well, I told my parents everything. And my dad went over to my uncle's house, my cousin's dad, and he told him everything. She was about to turn 19, so he took away her phone and her car. And I get a phone call from my ex, come back for part 3. So my lying, cheating ex calls me and explains to me why he actually slept with my cousin. He said that he was so lonely and that he didn't know what to do, and that the closest thing to me he could find was my cousin. Right, as if that was any comfort to me. He said I should be grateful that I didn't cheat with someone else. I told him he had totally betrayed my trust and that I could never ever trust him again. And then he confessed that she was pregnant and that his parents wanted them to get married. He said he just wanted to give me a heads up. Then he said that we could still be together but just not tell anyone, so basically he wanted me to be his side piece. I couldn't believe the words that were coming out of his mouth. It was like I didn't know this man. Guess what I did? I recorded the entire conversation. So I went straight to my cousin and I let her listen to it. She was so shocked. She couldn't believe that he would offer to have me as a side chick. Well, I also let my uncle listen to it. He went to my ex's house and beat him up. Honestly, that made me sad, but he deserved it. They now have a baby and he's gained 50 pounds. Trust your instincts, girl, and always record your conversations. Also, how cute are my nails? Here's a little story time of what my crazy celebrity ex-boyfriend would get mad at if I did or did not do. He would get mad if I would, for example, go to the DMV and put lip gloss on to take a picture. He said that I was trying to get attention from other guys, and the fact that he wasn't going with me proved that I was trying to get attention from other guys, therefore pickup guys at the DMV. He would also get mad if I showed him too much affection or if I tried to kiss him, because he said that that meant that I was a nymphomaniac and that the only conclusion he could come to was that I was cheating on him because I was a nymphomaniac. So eventually I stopped being affectionate altogether, and that made him think that I didn't want him because I was never affectionate. So I told him one day, well, if I am affectionate, it's bad, but if I'm not affectionate, it's bad. And he said, you're right, so you're stuck. He would also, for some reason, think that I was Lil Wayne's side chick, so anytime a Lil Wayne song came on, I had Part 2 of what my celebrity ex-boyfriend would get mad at if I did or didn't do. He would get mad if I answered the phone too quick because that meant that I was hiding something and I didn't want him to be suspicious, but it also made him mad if I didn't answer the phone quick enough because that meant that I was definitely doing something bad. He would also get mad if I offered to go over to his place instead of mine because that meant I was hiding guys in my apartment, in my bathroom and in my closet. So he would randomly show up to my apartment, check underneath my bed, my closets, and my bathrooms. And when he saw that there was no one there, he would storm out and say, I'm going to catch you one day. He would also get upset if my manager or my agent called me telling me that I had an audition because it made him envious, although he would say that what they were trying to do was actually pimp me out. He would get so envious and jealous if I had booked a commercial, if I was working on set, or if I had anything going for me in my life other than him. My husband just confessed to me that he settled for me. Disclaimer, is not my story time, send me an Instagram. Ugh. My husband and I met when we were in college. My best friend at the time, let's call her Tori, her and I lived together and were best friends. We did everything together. I mean, we were like sisters. Let's call my husband Jack. Jack came to school and he was a newbie. He had 0 friends, so Tori and I decided to take him in. So the 3 of us went on to become the 3 Musketeers. He would stay over our apartment so much that we actually just asked him to move in. We would cook for each other, help each other study. We would even do each other's laundry whenever somebody needed help. I'm telling you, we were all like a tight-knit family. But I have a confession. As soon as Jack moved in, I started falling in love with him. But at the time, I never had the balls to ever tell him. You see, Tori was considered the prettier of the two of us. And I never resented Tori for that, but people made it very clear that she was the prettier one. And she was always the one to get hit on, never me. But one night, we all got drunk and Jack ended up kissing me. He actually even tried to hook up with me, but I said no. Part 2 is up. My husband confessed that he settled for me. Disclaimer, it's not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. That night, he tried to hook up with me, but I said no. The following morning, he actually apologized. At the time, Tori had just started dating another guy. I mean, Tori had a new boyfriend every single week. At the time, I wished I could have one boyfriend. While she had 10, I had 0. This is when I started noticing that Jack was a little jealous of Tori's new relationship. Anytime her new boyfriend would come over, he would get in a really bad mood. I asked him if he was jealous and he said no. A few days later, we all got drunk again and Jack kissed me again. Eventually, we ended up dating and he asked me to be his girlfriend and then we got married. And that all happened within a year. Tori at this time had already gotten married to the guy that she was dating. We actually both had our weddings around the same time. At the time, I felt so lucky that I was able to marry the man that I had fallen in love with in college. I was actually afraid that I would end up alone because I wasn't as pretty as Tori. Fast forward to a year after we all got married. We actually all ended up living in the same cities as well. Tori invited us over for dinner to see their new house. During the dinner, my husband decided to have a few too many drinks. And that's when he blurted out, "I actually liked Tori before I liked you. I only married you because Tori got engaged." They all laughed at this. They clearly thought it was a joke. I laughed it off too. Part 3 is up. My husband confessed to me that he settled for me. Disclaimer, is not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. That's when he said in front of everyone that he only married me because he lost his chance with Tori. They all laughed. I mean, even Tori's husband found it funny. When we finally got in the car to head home, I asked him if he actually meant it. He looked at me and he said, "Yeah, I liked Tori before I liked you," and that the only reason he hooked up with me was because he was mad at Tori. I started to cry uncontrollably. This whole time, I never thought he had a thing for Tori. He stops the car and he says, "But I love you," that he had no feelings for Tori anymore. I asked him why he would think that was okay to say out loud. He said he had probably had too many drinks. Yeah, it's the alcohol's fault for sure. When we got home, I asked him again if he really loved me. That's when he explained that the love he has for me is different than the love he had for Tori, and that he was actually infatuated with Tori. That our love was safe love. He said, "Just forget about what I said. It was just a joke. I just wanted to make everyone laugh." That's when I realized that he had made a joke at my cost. And it was all to make Tori laugh. Called Tori the next day and explained everything to her. That's when she confessed that her and Jack had been hooking up in college. That sometimes they would hook up when I was asleep on the couch. That they had even done it on top of the kitchen counter and in my bedroom. I told my husband, and that's when he said that I needed to let it go. That Tori was part of the past. He doesn't even touch me or kiss me. He's always angry and reproaching everything that I did. Thinking about leaving him. We don't have kids yet. What should I do?